Coming up on Maine Challenge, State Senate candidate Chloe Maxman. Hello and welcome to Maine Challenge, a production of Lincoln County Indivisible and Lincoln County Television. Our guest today is Chloe Maxman, a state representative from Noblesboro and a candidate for Senate District 13. And welcome, Chloe.
Thank you so much for having me.
I have been very impressed with observing from a few districts away. Your approach to campaigning is very different from most of those that we've seen. It's sort of an amalgam of campaigning, but even more of community service, of actual community service while you are running your campaign. I was very excited to see that happening, and I'd love it if you'd tell me a little bit more about the origins of that.
Absolutely. I grew up in Noblesboro, my family's farm, and I've lived here my whole life. And I love Maine. That's really the key thing that people take away after they meet me. My whole life has been about figuring out how to best fight for our state. And as I've grown older, I've really come to see how it's politics that is so intertwined with our lives, especially nowadays when our political system is failing us on so many fronts. It's in our faces every day how much we need our political system. And it's got us in this mess, and it's what we need to get us out. Politics is made up of the people that we elect. The policy is shaped by their perspectives. And so it's really important that we think more critically about our elections. That is about how people act when they're in office. But to me, the biggest opportunity is what happens on the campaign trail. That is when we have the space to create a different kind of political conversation in our communities that's rooted here, that comes from here. And so for me, part of A New Politics has been really rethinking what a campaign can look like. My background is in community organizing and really working with folks who have been impacted by different issues and using our power as members of this community to call on politics to fight for us. So that's really called issue organizing traditionally. So what we try and do with our campaign is take the deep personal attachment that we have to these issues and bring them into the sphere of electoral politics so that we're building movements that last beyond election day, beyond me, and hopefully lay the foundation for something better and stronger.
And regardless of the outcome of any campaign, you're doing good in your hometown. So that's really, I think, very impressive and very exciting. And I appreciate the fact that you're taking this approach. It's healthy and sort of a new arrangement that we haven't seen a whole lot of. You are leaping from the House to the Senate in one short bound. What led you to decide to do that?
That is a good question, and a question that people ask me a lot. The origins of it stem from a lot of what I was just talking about. In my mind, especially after campaigning in District 88, so much of the potential that I see in how we shape a new kind of politics happens on the campaign trail. And the opportunity to do that with most of District 88, I won't represent one of my towns anymore, but I'll represent the other 3.5. So, I'm sticking with most of District 88 and expanding our work across this incredible district. District 13 is all of Lincoln County except for Dresden, plus Washington and Windsor. It's the place that I grew up, and it was just so exciting to think about what we could do in this community with a new way of thinking about politics. So that's what gets me out of bed every day with when you're a candidate and with campaigning. Well, I don't know how other people feel, but for me, my whole identity does not revolve around November 3rd. It's about what I do every single day between now and then that builds something that is stronger than what we had before. So if I'm gonna pour my heart and soul into campaigning, then doing it with all the folks across this district is the way that we want it to go.
Well, as a former legislator, I would say bless you, and may this become a model for future campaigns. I mean, it woke old guys like me up a little bit to say, hey, that's a cool way to do it.
Mhm.
And I really wish you the best, and I hope more candidates around the state adopt that model, because it's a good one. And one of the things that I was never comfortable with was the uh, sobriquet politician,
Mm.
because I didn't run because I thought I should be a politician. I ran because I wanted to make a difference, and I thought it would be a good uh, curve turn in my career before retirement. And I'm glad I did. I served 4 terms, and I enjoyed my time there. I really enjoyed the people on both sides of the aisle, and it was a very good experience. So I'm glad people who are not old and at the end of their career like me are doing that. And so thank you for that. I want to tell a quick story here. I know this should be your time, but your opponent in the Senate race, Dana Dow, served in the Senate when I was in the House, and I know he served in the House before that. Um, and I was also a customer of his furniture store, and had a problem. And uh, he came to my house, and it wasn't somebody who worked for him, it was him. And he and I, of course, knew each other from the halls of the State House, even though we were at different ends of the hallway. And I asked him if he was ever going to run again. And we talked about serving, and he said he wasn't. He was out of office at this time, whenever this was. And he said, I'm not going to run again. They're asking me to run. I'm not going to run again. And I understood that, and I related to it completely, because there are parts, as I'm sure you've discovered, there are parts of the job that aren't that great. And so I got that, I related to that, and I was really stunned when a few months later he ran for the Senate, because I knew that he sort of shared that sentiment that he didn't really want to be there. And so I think it's really exciting and encouraging that someone like you, a young person, running for office, and I wish you very well. I've got another little speech I'm going to make about the campaign, but let's turn it back to you. I'm not supposed to be lecturing here.
That's okay.
Let's talk a little bit about climate. I know you have been involved in a state version of the Green New Deal, but I can't say that I could explain the difference between the Green New Deal as Congress looks at it and as you look at it. So maybe you could talk about that.
Definitely. Yeah. So I did sponsor the Maine Green New Deal, and for those listening in Maine, I think it's important to know that it's okay. It's not. It had no fiscal note. It didn't cost Maine any money, but it really paved the way for how we create a different kind of job industry here, and so that's very important to me. The federal Green New Deal is a massive, non-binding proposal, basically, to tackle the climate crisis. It's very broad and deep and far-reaching. Um, that's that. The Maine Green New Deal is targeted legislation that came out of my conversations with constituents in 2018. I never heard people talk about climate change directly, but I constantly heard a need for growing industries here in rural Maine, good jobs, good wages, kind of a sustainability, both in environment and economy, that we feel like we can't really hold on to right now. And so whenever I heard of that, the first thing that I would always say to people is, I really see the renewable energy industry as a way to provide that stability for our state. We're a state that our economy depends on our natural resources. We have to confront the climate crisis to protect Maine. And we can do that in a way that lifts up Mainers in working rural places. So I sponsored a bill, and I called it the Maine Green New Deal, to draw attention to a different way of talking about climate that was really rooted in this, in a rural mindset, in a mindset that was really focused on, is my job going to last? Are there going to be jobs for my children? So it's not as big and scary as people might think, but I think it's when we talk about climate change, we often really focus on numbers and what's going to happen in 2050 and the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And all of that is, of course, very real. It's a scientific crisis, but the way that it lands here is very different. Our lived experience of it is so different. And I think it's important that we root our climate work in that kind of lived experience. That's how we make sure that our climate policy is benefiting all Mainers and not leaving anybody behind. So the Green New Deal was originally had 5 different pieces to it, but since it's politics, it got taken apart and redone a little bit. The main thrust of the bill is ensuring that as we transition to renewable energy, that all Mainers are treated equitably and fairly. If we look at what's happening with the fossil fuel industry and our current energy system right now, we see that some communities are impacted more than others. You know, communities that live next to a refinery, an extraction site, a pipeline, they're impacted more than folks who don't. And that is so deeply unjust and unfair. And I don't think we want to create a new energy system that replicates that same kind of injustice. So the bill is trying to say, hey, we need to make sure that our climate policy is fair and equitable. The 2 tangible pieces of policy that came out of the bill were, 1, ensuring that a certain percentage of workers on new electricity generation projects of 2 megawatts or more in Maine come from federal or Maine Department of Labor apprenticeship programs. If there aren't enough apprentices available, it's not a mandate on businesses. But what this does is, you know, I always hear that businesses don't want to come here because there's not enough trained workers. Well, this fixes that problem. And then people are always saying, well, I don't want to get trained because I don't know if there's going to be a job for me here in this industry. It fixes that problem too. So it really creates a pipeline for folks who want to get trained in the renewable energy industry. And then the second part of the bill supports schools as they transition to renewable energy. As we all know, property taxes are a huge, huge burden on our communities. And I don't think that the cost of funding our schools' renewable energy transition to fall onto property taxpayers. So we created a mechanism to take some of the burden off of that.
As you speak of addressing the climate crisis, the image that comes into my mind is poverty, but the image that most people have of poverty is either an urban poverty or it's a rural poverty from the 1920s. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how poverty, what poverty is like in Lincoln County.
Oh yeah, I mean, poverty in our communities can be so complex. There's so many intersectional things happening, you know, where we live. I think access. I think like so much of poverty in a rural place revolves around access. Like we can't walk to the grocery store. If we don't have a car, we can't walk to our jobs. We can't walk to see our families or to the bank or the pharmacy. Yeah, we can't get the services that we need without access. And so I always see transportation access as a huge part of opportunity in our community. I think we also lack access in terms of healthcare resources, in terms of our school funding. I mean, everything in a rural place is just less. So I think it's a really complex issue. I mean, 20%. I think don't quote me on this. Maybe I shouldn't say it, but around 20% of young folks in our community are food insecure. And it's very complicated here. I think, you know, when I think about climate change in particular, when we were working on the Green New Deal bill, the main folks that I worked with were the Maine AFL-CIO and the labor community to really bring in a different perspective into the climate conversation that usually isn't there. And one of the things that we kept talking about was that the same unions that are representing folks installing solar panels are the same unions representing folks working on pipelines in Maine. So we can't just, you know, put in rules that take away a whole industry and put unions in particular in a really awful position. We need to really be creating ways forward that lift up everybody and that don't penalize just some people. And I think I think about that a lot when I think about policy in rural places, because something that might work really well in Portland might have really bad impacts here. It might be taking resources away that we really need here. And so anytime I'm legislating, I think about it through the lens of a rural place. I think about the elderly folks that I meet who live at the far end of a dirt road and don't have internet and barely have cell phone service, and they're who I think about all the time.
One more question about your legislative service before we move on. Are there other issues that you worked on and that you're proud of, win or lose, that you put an effort into in your term in the legislature? And also, what committee did you serve on?
I served on the Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry Committee, which was, I learned so much. It's all my committee choices reflected what my community is. So it's obviously a very important committee for District 88 and District 13. And so I've learned a lot through the Agriculture Committee work. I sponsored 4 pieces of legislation. They all came directly from conversations that I had with constituents, and I'm very proud of that. One was Green New Deal. One was one came from a nurse that I met in Noblesboro, and around sexual assault kits and how long they're stored, and justice for survivors. One was around trying to get Congress to take action around the windfall elimination provision, which is this very wonky but pretty prevalent thing where if you work in the private and public sector, when you retire, your Social Security benefits are cut because you're technically double dipping with your pension. And it's very unjust and mostly impacts state workers and teachers. And so trying to do a lot of work around that. And then my last bill was around increasing rural transportation access for seniors and adults with disabilities. The bill, it's actually an amazing bill. It's the bill that I love the most, and it's stuck in session right now because it got carried over to this year, and we're not in session, and so it's just melting in some office somewhere. But that bill was so important to me, really seeing transportation as the greatest equalizer in rural communities and trying to make sure that some of our neediest citizens have transportation access. The other thing that I'm really proud of is that I committed myself to really representing my community. It was the biggest thing that I heard in 2018. It's the biggest thing that I hear this year. We don't feel represented or heard. So every month since I've gotten elected, except for one, I have hosted Coffee with Chloe, or it's now Ice Cream with Chloe because we are outside, where I provide a space for constituents to come and just talk about what they're thinking about, and for me to ask them questions about bills that we're voting on, and to create that space where they can connect with me in a way that's comfortable and honest and easy. I've also, if people don't feel coming into that more public space, I've spent almost all of my time just talking with constituents, talking with people in the community so that I can hear what's going on both sides of an issue and then represent more authentically. I know that not everyone is going to agree with me. My own family doesn't even agree with me all the time. That's okay. But to me, listening and respecting what I hear is the absolute core of being in office.
And if you are chosen by the voters of District 13 to serve in the Maine State Senate, what will be your agenda for your first term there?
That's another good question. I think it's a 5-page document now of bills that I want to sponsor next session that range from bills supporting our veterans to more climate change bills. I want to reintroduce my rural transportation bill. Just things that constituents have brought to me throughout the past 2 years, things that I'm hearing from people right now. Open primaries. I'm a big fan of open primaries and want to sponsor that bill again. There's a whole list of them. So there's a plethora. I think that there's a couple themes that unite the work that I want to do. The first one is continuing to be as responsive and accountable as I can be in office. I think it's really important that we're setting a new precedent for what we expect of our elected officials, that they are always answering their phone, their email, that they're present, that they're listening. I don't know how anybody can represent if they're not doing that. So I'm going to continue all of that work and keep trying to think about that in different ways. The other big thing that I'm thinking about is resiliency. We are facing a massive budget crisis in Maine. We're in the middle of a pandemic. It's going to be with us for a while. We know that other systemic crises are coming our way, and we have an opportunity to rebuild. So much has been torn down with COVID, and the folks that we elect in November are going to be making big decisions about what our rebuilding looks like. And I think there are massive opportunities to rebuild in a way that makes our local economies so much stronger than they are right now, to support our workers, the folks who have, I mean, our essential workers are the folks who are making the least amount of money, and they've taken on the greatest risk in COVID. And that's so scary to me. That's so unfair. And we have this opportunity to rethink what it looks like to really support each other in our communities. And that's the work I'm really excited about doing next year.
Are you in favor of Medicare for all, or some vast improvements in our current healthcare system? And can little old Maine do something to make it better for Maine citizens without the whole country doing it?
Yes. So I think the terminology means so much to so many different people right now. So, what I say is that I think that healthcare is a human right. I think that everybody in our community deserves both accessible and affordable healthcare. It's a human rights crisis right now, and again, I think it especially impacts rural communities where our access to resources, to doctors, to what we need is limited, and it's far away. So that's where I stand on that. I do think there's so much that we can do at the state level. There were bills that we worked on last year. There are bills that are unfinished this year that we're doing a lot to really protect Mainers against some of the things that these massive pharmaceutical companies are doing. But there's certainly more that can be done, and it's at the top of my mind all the time. I mean, when we think about what resiliency looks like for our community, and especially in a pandemic, obviously healthcare is at the very top.
As you campaign for the Senate, do you feel the need to ask your opponent where he joins President Trump on issues and where he would repudiate President Trump? In other words, I don't expect you to answer for Senator Dow, but do you think he supports kids in cages? And if he doesn't, would he speak up about it?
I don't know. That would be a good question for him. I mean, to me, like, part of our campaigning is that we're creating a positive vision about what we stand for. Senator Dow is running his campaign. I'll never say anything bad about him. I don't believe in that kind of campaigning. I'll just stand up for what we believe in and what we're fighting for. So yeah, I don't know what he would say. Someone can.
Well, that's all good, but I think the voters deserve to know, not just in your Senate district, but in all the Senate districts, and I guess you could extend this to the House district as well. Where does the Trump agenda and the Republican Party match, and where doesn't it? So the convention certainly hasn't helped, and I would really like to hear some courage from Republican state senators to say, no, I diverge from the president on immigration. I diverge from the president on this issue or that issue. I think they're getting a pass, and I don't think they deserve it, frankly. That's my own little editorial here, but and I appreciate the fact that you want to be positive in your campaign, and that's how I always campaigned, and I respect that and appreciate it. But this is comparison. This is, where do you stand versus where do I stand? And I have a feeling that Senator Chloe Maxman would be very opposed to the whole program that separates children from their families and basically puts little kids in prison. Those kids are going to grow up, and they're not going to like America. And it really upsets me. Maybe you can see that. And I'd really like to hear Republicans in the campaign speak up. And I really don't think they deserve to get a pass on that. Sorry, that was my other speech.
Well, I hear that. I mean, I think yeah, speaking for myself, I am against that. It was horrifying and tragic to see the photos and videos of what was happening to children at the border. I think, yeah, I believe in candidate accountability and elected official accountability. I think these questions and hard questions should be asked of people running for office. I just don't want to answer for him. I don't know where he stands. Never talk with him about it.
And since you're being so positive, I'll be the negative one and point out that there is some significant evidence that the reason that the Republicans did not respond even to a request for a vote on a decision to come back into session during August is because they had fundraisers scheduled and they can't raise money directly while they're in session, and they didn't want to disrupt their fundraising activities. So they didn't even reply when the Speaker and the President of the Senate said, will you come back to a special session? I assume you favor a special session because you have some bills in the hopper?
I did. I voted both times to go back into session, not because of my bills, but because it's our job. It's what we were elected to do. It's what we're paid to do. Mainers are going to work every single day, and the Republicans would not vote. They didn't even vote no. They just didn't respond for us to go back. So that is fact. Another fact is that there were multiple Republican fundraisers scheduled throughout August, including one at Dow Furniture, which I've been public about. But you know, I think it's hard I think it's hard to say like this is why we're not in session. I think there's a lot of reasons. I've read all the Republican arguments. I've read all the Democratic arguments. I mean, to me, it's just so deeply not about party. The decision to go back to session. It's about our values as Mainers, which is that we do what we were elected to do, and that is to run through the bills that taxpayers have already spent thousands to process, and that are by and for our constituents, and also to deal with COVID and make sure that people are getting what they need, because I don't think they are right now. So,
well, Thank you very much, Chloe Maxman, candidate for Senate District 13. I will say at this point that we have invited Senator Dow to join us on this show, either with you on this show. He never responded, so we assume he doesn't want to do it. But having attacked him here, I will invite him to come on and defend himself. And if he wishes to do that, that's fine. But again, thank you very much, Representative Chloe Maxman from Noblesboro. You've been a good guest and you're a good candidate, and I really appreciate your approach to service. And that's really what it's all about.
It is indeed. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Well, thank you. And thanks to all the viewers who joined us today. Join us again next week, 10, 2, and 6, I think. And we'll see you next time. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you, Chloe.
Thank you.
Show your support for Maine Challenge and LCTV's programming. We're all about community. Please go to lctv.org to make a contribution. Your support makes us stronger together.